Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Y'all, Jimmy, the Chaos Goblin, strikes again. I should have known better than to mention I was working on my DC Universe meets Ravenloft hybrid D&D campaign on social media. My bad. He goes and tags a bunch of comics creators we know, and now I have to get it in gear and whip this campaign into shape so we can start playing. Another friend chimes in, "Are you going to make maps?" It's fair to say it's been a while since I put something together, so I guess? It was then that I discovered Arkenforge. If you don't know who Arkenforge is, they have everything you need to make your TTRPG more fun and immersive, allowing you to build, play, and export animated maps, including in-person fog of war capability that lets your players interact with maps as the adventure unfolds while you, the DM, get the full picture. Now I'm set to easily build high-res animated maps, saving myself precious time and significantly adding nuance to our campaign. That's a win every day in my book. Check them out at arkenforge.com and use the discount code YETI5 to get $5 off. I'll drop a link in the show notes for you, and big thanks to Arkenforge for partnering with our show. I think I'm going to make Jimmy play a Goblin Warlock just to get even.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Yeti's Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm one of your hosts, Jimmy Gasparo, and I have a fantastic episode that we are going to get into today. I have artist Dan Panosian and writer Scott Snyder. Super excited to have both of these fine gentlemen and comic creators on the podcast today. We're going to talk about Dark Horse's Canary. It is a Western horror. I absolutely loved it. The trade is coming out, I think, June 26th, and they're both here, so we can kind of dig into Canary, how the two of them work together, and whatever else they have coming out, and any other fun comic topics we find along the way. So, Dan, Scott, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us. Pleasure.
I was very excited to talk to both of you. Goes without saying, I think I only have this podcast to just talk to folks who make comics that I like. So that's like the only like ground floor of this podcast was just to talk to people who make comics I like. And so I'm very excited to have the two of you on here, and in particular to talk about Canary. I'm a huge fan of Westerns, and to have like a Western horror, which I just don't think we see too much, even in comics. There's probably some films out there that do it, but other than like some issues of Jonah Hex, and I'm sure there's a few others I'm forgetting, but this was like a true kind of Western horror, like genre mixing, maybe some like Eldritch type of arcane stuff as well. And I really love the mashup. Like, yeah, give me more of it. Kind of, Scott, I'll start with you in terms of, was there some particular like impetus that you're like, oh, I want to tackle this now? Because this was initially a Comixology original, and this was kind of like your second wave of books there.
Yeah, well, it was. Thanks for asking. I mean, it was like part of the first sort of slate of books that we were doing with them. So it came out. I think it was like maybe the fifth in the line, but it was part of that kind of initial wave that we pitched to them when we first went over. And I think, I love Western as a genre. I mean, I've gotten to sort of play with it before, but I wanted to do one that felt like it was really sort of taking the genre somewhere I hadn't really tried. And Dan, I was a fan of his work forever, and we had known each other like in passing at cons and had become friendly. And I just, with these books, with Comixology and Dark Horse, the idea wasn't to have an idea, have a pitch and sort of write it up and go to different artists. The idea was to have sort of a really nascent idea. Like, I think I want to do something that is about like this premise, that keeps haunting me or something. And then bring that to a co-creator and have them build it with you in a way, or talk it through and build something that felt really organic to the both of us. So the fun of this book, like the other ones there too, but in particular this one with Dan was sort of listening to his love of westerns and of horror and building the whole story from the ground up together and going back and forth and getting to change things and adjust and try and make it something that we both really loved. So it was a real thrill. I mean, I'd love to work with Dan again anytime. So it was a blast.
Likewise. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was probably the most collaborative and easiest time I've ever had working with a writer, and so it was just a fun project. We had a great time.
Dan, I wanted to ask you in terms of the artwork in it. Was there anything in particular that you really were excited about, kind of getting to draw and showcase, either in the Old West or the horror elements?
Well, I mean, yeah, certainly melding those two genres together and doing it in a way that was fresh. Instantly when you're going to do a Western comic book, you're going to be compared to like the Mobius Blueberry stuff, and that's kind of a go-to, but at the same time, you don't want to copy that necessarily. And certainly, this is a horror story. It's more of a horror story. It just happens to take place in the West. So we started it out with bright colors and this is going to be in this family or this genre, and then progressively gets darker and darker. And it was interesting the way Scott fashioned the story, because a lot of the flashbacks that Scott created, we ended up putting them in, or he orchestrated and kind of, in a way, edited these flashbacks in different parts. So it was kind of interesting to see, even from a standpoint of drawing it, to see how the book would turn out eventually. Got another funny thing I never mentioned to you, but I got a real kick out of this, is because it was always a work in progress, and Scott is always, and we had a lot of time in between things. Sometimes the names would change, like the character names, and it was just interesting. I'm like, oh my god, okay, so that's it was fun in that way. But I always like the changes. I love how the book turned out. So the book has a lot of heart for a horror story. And I think with any story, you need that emotional heart factor. Like, you have to really, have a soft spot for the people, the characters, rather.
Yeah, if you don't care about the characters, sometimes aren't going to, not necessarily they have to be likable, but there has to be something you care about. Otherwise, you're not going to really care what happens to them.
100%.
And I really I really did like the character of William Holt. Well, I guess it's Azrael William Holt. Dan, you mentioned the flashbacks. That's one of the things that I thought came across so well in terms of the artwork. Because when we first meet Holt in the first issue, he's been through some stuff, and then you don't know exactly what it is, and it's kind of revealed over a series of flashbacks. But when we see Holt in a flashback, and it's clear who it is, but there is such a lightness to how he's drawn in those flashbacks. I mean, he's happy, and there's such a departure.
For a little while, he is.
Well, for a little while, but it really cements that he's gone through some stuff when you think back to those opening pages of that book, and those flashbacks work so well.
Because he's so hardened later, and Scott handles him in that kind of stoic sort of, way that you want to see your hero. But he definitely, now thanks to all the cool flashbacks, you know exactly why he's so stoic and grim.
Yeah, one of the things I really liked about Canary is, I grew up, my grandfather loved Westerns. And so growing up, there was always a Western on, from, John Wayne, John Ford Westerns to, not as high quality productions that they were cranking out in the 50s and 60s. And he watched them all. And, one of the tropes of that genre, you see the lone guy, someone who is stoic, standing up for the town or himself or whatever it might be, even if he's up against odds or overwhelming odds. I mean, but with Canary, where you see that he's facing something, is just there's there's nothing that can kind of overcome what he's dealing with, and being faced with something so dark at times. It's just not something you really see. And I really liked how the story kind of played out with Holt, what he dealt with in the beginning, and then what he ends up dealing with like later on in the town. And I don't know, I felt kind of like a real not just it was like let's mash up Western and horror, but I felt kind of like a real parallel to kind of some of the big issues we're going through today. I don't know, it's just very interesting how I kind of saw like what Holt was dealing with the town itself, with the mine of Canary, and I don't know, I like a bigger sense of some things we face today. I just was trying to draw some parallels there.
Well, Scott, when we first talked about it, that was Paramount, wasn't it, Scott? I mean,
yeah,
you wanted to make it. That was your intention, correct?
Yeah, very much. Let me just move this off the thing. It's I was just charging it, but I'm like too old to sit like that for too long. Yeah, I mean, the whole goal. I mean, like doing a Western for me and working with Dan, like when we first started talking about it, the fun was thinking of a Western as a way of kind of, the best Westerns are always about who we are as a nation and like in our sort of imagination at that moment. And there's some that are really critical, like Outlaw Josie Wales, or, and then there are the Searchers, and there are others that are really heroic. But that genre itself is so, purely indigenous to here. And it's so much about how we think of ourselves that when we started talking about it, it was like, oh, this is going to be a Western, but it's going to have horror elements. The more we went into it, though, it was like, look, we really want it to be something that's about this mine, and it's a kind of a classic ghost story about, a mine that might still have these victims living in it. But it wasn't really about that so much as it was this town, even in its name, Canary, as this kind of warning about what we might become, and whether this mine sort of has is a premonition of the things that we really are sort of afraid of about ourselves, but writ large. And so it was a really interesting project, kind of blending supernatural and making it something that felt almost like cosmic horror, and at the same time trying to also keep it relevant. And I think, Dan made a really good point at one point. There was actually, and I'm sorry, I completely dropped the ball on this for the trade, but I was very concerned about having the book have things in it, or have a level of violence and a level of of disturbing sort of imagery that felt like it was not typically found in Westerns, but that would sort of echo what we see today in all kinds of ways. And so in the initial drafts, the boy Apple, who kills the teacher in the inciting incident that kind of starts the whole story. And if you haven't read it yet, but you're watching this interview, essentially Canary is about a series of really random murders that are happening around this one area, where people, children, old people are going sort of berserk and just killing bunches of people for no reason whatsoever. And it's about a U.S. Marshal who's called in to investigate and is about to retire, and has had this really terrible experience in this area when he was younger with an outlaw who claimed to be something more than human because of the waters in this region, and is paired with a geologist who believes that there might be something in the underground sort of aquifer in this area that's causing people to go crazy. And what they find is something like much darker and more disturbing on a supernatural level about this mine, that it's this nexus of evil, but a place that is, sort of also exists almost out of time, and is this horror that's much bigger than like just sort of a haunted cavern. Anyway, but
there's like elements of like The Shining in this even. I mean, there's all sorts of little callbacks and little Easter eggs, Scott puts in there along the way. And it's one of those things, if you read it twice, you're like, oh, okay, this ties in here and this ties in there. It's probably a little maybe difficult at times for the Comixology readers to follow as much because the spacing of the books. But what's nice about this trade paperback coming out is you get to read it like you would, say, a movie.
Yeah, but there was even at the beginning, like the boy that kills the teacher in the inciting incident. Apple, we changed it. Initially, he shoots the teacher, and I just at the last minute, I really felt, and Comixology felt, but I felt as well that it might be like one step too far, only because there was things in the news constantly about school shootings,
and still are, sadly.
And Dan was braver than me about wanting to kind of put it in the trade, and I think ultimately the balance there, the thing that maybe speaks to the priorities of the book, was trying to really have it contain a level of kind of horror and violence and worry about who we're becoming that felt unsettling and disturbing, while not pushing it over the edge into something that also might be salacious or that stuff. And I'm not really sure, that's a hard balance to strike, I think.
Exactly.
But I love the book for what it's trying to do. And I'm so glad. I mean, it's gotten some of the best responses of anything that I've worked on in the creator-owned space. So it's so nice to see people responding to it in that way.
Yeah, I really liked how there were parts of it that I found, it's somewhat challenging, not in terms of like the violence that's depicted or, but more so in terms of what the book was, trying to say or get across. Like I love that Holt's father was a preacher, those types of elements that are woven in. I love how the page breaks are, the 1 through 6 form, and kind of how that ties into kind of like the underlying, if mythology is the right word, of the book. So all those little things that wanted me to like, dig in a little bit more and like ask some more questions. I really love. That's the kind of stuff like I love when I can find something like that in a comic. So there were all these little nuggets of things that I could dig a little deeper with, which I really enjoyed about the story. Yeah, I mean, I loved it.
Thanks.
I thought it was great. Dan, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because we've talked about Western and horror, but there are a lot of moments in this book that are just tense. And I think like tension is kind of difficult to do well in a comic book because it can be static. It might be better achieved in like a film, but you're able to do it, especially in a lot of close-ups. There's one, I don't know if it's issue 5 or 6, but in I guess those later issues between, I think it's Mabel and Holt, and there's just like close-ups on their face. I think it's right before they're deciding like what to do after something happens in the town, and like the tension is held so well in that paneling, and it really, I mean, the end of the book just kind of ratchets it up. But I really thought that you do that so well, and I mean, is that something you're conscious of in terms of like, how do I make this as, how do I focus in on the right thing to make it as tense as possible to really hold the reader's attention there?
Well, I think it's just a matter of like building and where you place that camera and when you go in close and when you're far enough away, like how close do you want the reader to be necessarily involved? Sometimes you feel safer further away. Sometimes, even if it's a top-down shot, like maybe you're safe up there. And it's a matter of, I don't know, I keep using the word safe, but especially in a horror film or comic, you want to play with those safety issues. So the typical comic book trope is to do a close-up at times, but I think sometimes that gets maybe overused or used as a cheat, and it should be done sparingly. But Scott gave me a lot of freedom, which I really appreciated. But his story was very, he knew exactly what he wanted, out out of certain scenes and scenarios, going as far as to say, now let's maybe change angles on the panels just to even further influence the fact that things are becoming very unsettling. And that's an interesting trick even in film, is when you have everything constantly centered and then you start deviating away from that in a slow pattern from like a storyboard sense. The person watching doesn't even necessarily know what's happening, but subconsciously, things are going askew. So it was nice that Scott seems to, so much experience, countless books and titles, and he knows how to tell a story, obviously. So not every writer is going to say, hey, I want let's play with these elements, and he knew exactly what he wanted.
All right, let's take a quick break. Hey comics fam, indie comic book publisher Band of Bars just got a level up and announced it is now a cooperative. This heralds a new era for them, including a partnership with Dauntless Stories. And they added several new members to the ownership group. Marcus Jimenez is now Chief Operating Officer, Brent Fisher takes on the role of Chief Diversity Officer, and Joey Galvez is introduced as Head of Kickstarter Ops and Social Media Manager, which is sure to increase their capabilities overall as a publisher. And it further promotes their mission statement of advancing representation, inclusion, and diversity in the medium. They also established a new board of directors to help chart the new path of their journey. With new projects in the works like Alas Goodbye dropping in June, Unbroken soon launching on Kickstarter, and Pawn coming up with Dauntless, stay tuned to this space for more exciting news from the growing Bards family. Let's get back to the show.
Scott, is that in terms of working with different artists, and you've worked with some artists, multiple times throughout different books, and, someone like Dan, who you said you've come across, but this was your first time working on something like this. How do you figure out, do you just script everything the same way? Do you say, Dan, how do you, do you have a conversation when you're starting out? Like, Dan, how do you what do you want me to do? Do you want full scripts? Do you want, more room to play around with? How do you get into that, conversation? I mean, I figure with 6 issues, it's probably something that has to happen fast, but there's still a bit of a learning curve, right?
Oh yeah, I mean that was the whole fun. It was getting to sort of talk to each other at the beginning and see how we like to work, and figuring it out together. I was at DC for so long. For me, I mean, just consistently for 10 years plus, with never really leaving for any period of time. So being on Batman and then doing events like Metal and Death Metal and Justice League and all of that, they're so constrained by, by the expectations and the demands of those characters. And I love that world. I mean, I adore it. But leaving there in 2020, and then having the pandemic and all of this stuff, the exciting thing and the challenge was being able to say, no matter what, I'm just going to make books with these people who I find really inspiring, some of whom I've worked with before, but not in this capacity, some of whom I've never worked with but wanted to, and figure out books that are organically ours together. And sometimes that meant experimenting a little as we went, and sometimes some co-creators really liked having an extremely firm plan, page to page in all kinds of ways. But for me, the joy was being able to kind of be a little looser and create together. And no, I always knew the ending of the book. I always knew, the basic bones of it. But being able to feel it out together and be like, which parts are, is Dan responding the most to? Which parts working together feel like they have the most energy? Expanding those, sort of relying on other things that feel like we didn't see before, but then Dan would draw something and then it would give me an idea. Even the way he drew the mask, I just loved so much, like the upside down coffin, and more of the stuff about Holt's father and this kind of this strange sort of past that he had, this kind of religious background, came out as the book was going. And so things like that just sort of were wonderful discoveries along the way. It was part of the fun of the process. But it
Yeah.
was always starts with, and I'd recommend this to like any aspiring writer listening to this. It took me a while to understand this, a couple of years at least, like getting into the industry, but talking to your co-creator or the artist you're working with, trying to find a sweet spot where you're both, or where you as a writer are giving as much as you can to the artist to be able to allow them to shine. It'll work a lot better for you, you know, rather than just writing in a very strict fashion that only works for you. I have friends who are very big writers who do that and it works, you know, they can only really write one way. But for me, part of the fun is trying to be adaptable and and making something that feels kind of organically, or just alive and made together as you go in some way.
When you're
Yeah.
working with, how different is it when you're working with, say, Jock or Greg Capullo? Is is there a variation in how you deliver the scripts or plots?
Yeah, there is like those two are more like Greg in particular likes like the absolute least amount possible. So
Mhm.
sometimes with Greg, like I'll write the script more in terms of what I need so I can sort of feel it out and live in it and then undo that and then write something that's like a third of that, you know, and it took me a long time to be able to operate that way comfortably. But our compromise was like I would get on the phone and kind of walk him through the way I saw the story
Mhm.
or the issue, and then sort of be like, "But you do whatever you want, and here are the basic beats." And
Yeah.
he would, and our relationship really evolved that way. Whereas Jock is similar to the way we work together, where it was sort of a hybrid, you know, where it
Mhm.
was a lot of um, the dialogue isn't in there, but it's described as to what it'll
Yeah.
be. And
I know exactly. Yeah, I always knew exactly what that was interesting for me because I always knew basically what everyone's saying in every panel because Scott would describe the beats, and so you'd have to hit those beats, and you know occasionally there's an extra panel to hit a certain beat, but it would be very. I was just kind of excited to see how it would actually be scripted because sometimes there was scripting and sometimes it was more like he's angry about this or it's this person's agenda here and they're manipulating that person and what have you. But I found that very interesting. You know.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, these last few years have been honestly, I think the most inspiring for me of my career, getting to work with some people who I was really familiar with, like Greg on We Have Demons, and then some people I had never worked with um, extensively before, like Dan and Lisa Tula Lote, and each book was its own experience that way, you know, and it was just a real joy. And I've loved this period, you know. I feel like I got to grow so much learning from them as a writer that it has been like, yeah, probably also the happiest period. You know, it's just been so creatively exciting to just
Yeah.
make stuff together and have good partners also. Like very grateful to Comixology and Dark
Yeah.
Horse and other places that have been supportive of me the last few years and my partners. But it's been great, you know, just
Yeah, Comixology put a lot of love into all the books and the presentation. That comic book convention, um, you know, brought so much light and attention to all the series. Would we? You end up calling it Scott? What was it? Scottober?
oh yeah, they did that. Yeah, Scottober.
Scott
And
Tober.
then
I
they
love
did
it.
Scottober again, yeah, and in July, which was funny. But
Yeah,
they were very supportive, you know, and
yeah,
then they're it was great, you know. They were up for anything, and I mean, again, my goal was to be able to just try things that I hadn't before. So to be able to maybe work with some artists that I'd never gotten to collaborate with, or try a genre I hadn't, like romance, historical
romance.
romance, like Barnstormers or
Yeah,
All Ages, you know, like with Jamal, with Dudley Dotson. It's totally out of my wheelhouse. Like we were like, let's write a book for our kids. And so
mhm.
it was a real creative walkabout, you know, and it was just a real joy. I'm very grateful to have gotten to do it.
I enjoyed harassing Jamal at San Diego. That was a lot of fun for me.
Jamal's great.
Yeah,
well, that's
no,
the other thing too.
He's a great guy.
Like,
good sense of humor. You know,
everybody. I mean, that's the other thing is like, there's not. I mean, everybody here is somebody that I really like. As a person and want to spend time with. So, I think my biggest regret or the biggest issue over the last few years was just the Witches Writers Room came along. I didn't know that it would be that show would get greenlit. It's the first thing I've ever had, like, actually wind up on TV. And it was, you never know where that lands or how it was going to happen. And it's
a show runner too, Scott.
I'm show running it. Yeah. I'm co-show running it with
responsibility.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that the biggest issue I've had is more having one foot in animation while trying to really give my everything to the books. And I feel really proud and confident of the quality of the books, that never worry about that. But the thing I regret is more like, I wish I had gotten to spend more time with each creator, just socially and getting to know. Like, I was very, I wish I had more time to hang out with Dan and get to know Dan and go to cons and talk more and all of that stuff too, which we did get to do. But I think that was the part that for me got a bit swallowed up over the last few years by TV stuff, which is I feel
really slow down either, Scott. I don't see that slowing down for you.
No, but I mean, like, I'm gonna survive. I'll make it. I'm gonna make it. I think the I've pared back a lot, so I have a lot less on my plate the coming year. But I think I do. I don't know. But I love all the stuff, too. And like, they just, you know what I mean? Like, I love the books and I love the project. So, and I would put the books of the last couple of years up against anything I've ever done, we were lucky enough to get some accolades for them and stuff, but just beyond all of that, beyond the critical reception, I'm so proud of them. Canary, I would put up against anything I've ever done in my whole life, and that's a testament to Dan's work, hugely. But that was the experience with these books, and Canary being, like, to me, a superlative example of that. Just something that I never would have gotten to make, couldn't have made this way without a partner like Dan, and just making something that only the two of us could do as a team, and really surprising me and loving it. So
likewise. I mean, it's kind of a once in career sort of move like that, to work with someone like Scott, because I admired his work. I very rarely will buy comics, and to buy his first works and everything. I didn't get Human Torch though. Sorry, Scott.
Yeah, that's Snyder. You should say that was funny, because today was the birthday of the Human Torch, and that was my very first comic that I ever had published. Was a one shot for the revival of Timely comics at Marvel. I still get like a penny in royalties now and then. It's like and I was Janine Schaefer, and it was Scott Wagner who did Atomic Robo, and he gave me I have a page here, but I'd never written for comics before, and so I was just like, my script for like for a 20-page thing was like 50 pages long, where it was like, and then this, and then this, and Scott had to be like, that's not how we do this exactly. He was so wonderful, and like, I changed it, but yes, that was today. Today was.
I saw that today. I was like, no, I wasn't aware of your work until like the vampire stuff, American Vampire. So, but I remember seeing that and reading it and going, oh, this is so edgy, and I don't know, it felt like, okay, this is kind of where comics are going, and it was exciting, very exciting stuff.
Thanks, man. Well, same. I mean, again, I'm really eager to work together again, and I feel like, just we have the second season of the Writers Room stuff this summer, And then in the fall into the winter, things really, I get back to comics in a bigger way,
That's
So,
exciting. Well, keep me in
Yeah.
mind, Scott. Keep me in mind.
No, there's no way to have had a better experience. And again, like, I feel like you're also one of the not unsung heroes because people really love you, but I honestly feel you're not given the credit you deserve enough for the consistent quality, the growth in your work, all of it. Like, just, I think you're
Thanks.
somebody who deserves a lot more attention than you get sometimes in the industry that way. So my hope is that, I don't know, my hope is this award season, people will notice the book for you, not for me, but for you.
I appreciate that. Let's see. Fingers crossed.
I mean, I agree. Not just the art, in terms of the penciling, but the coloring in Canary is unbelievable.
Unbelievable, yeah.
And I mean, Dan, you're coloring your own work, and I mean, just from the yellows to the oranges to like then the deep blue, like the color palette kind of changes with the issues at times, and I just love the color work in it.
That
I
was
think
a big component. Yeah, there's less and less ink on the pages these days. It's more color. Color is very. It's tough. I spent more time coloring than drawing half the time. So that it started out. There was kind of a funny story. I had in my mind. I wanted it to kind of look, in the beginning at least, like the Wild Wild West intro, like that title sequence from the TV show.
Okay.
Not the Will Smith movie,
right.
but the TV show. And so I had just this idea of how that kind of looked, and but I never bothered to actually find out what it looked like until we were maybe a full issue in, and I was like, that's got to be somewhere on YouTube. Someone's probably uploaded that, and they had. And I looked at it, and it is nothing like that at all. Like, I had just imagined all sorts of like painterly, skies and all these kind of Bob Peak, inspired like wild brush strokes, and none of that is in that title sequence. But sometimes that's why your like memory of like an Old West or a Batman movie, or even sometimes a comic book, like how you remember it or how it made you felt, is better than what it might have really been.
Yeah, it is funny how
thanks, Scott.
It is.
Thank you.
It is funny how that happens. Scott, you mentioned witches and the writer's room for season 1, and then you said you're rolling right into, because season 2's already been greenlit, and witches.
The writing of it, yeah. So I'm excited. So they greenlit us for a second season for the production of it. So technically they could do it and then say we don't want to put it on TV, but I would be surprised if that happens at this stage, unless we really bomb or whatever. But so we have a second season this summer.
So well, fingers crossed that works out. But I wanted to say, witches. I love witches. I mean, it's one of my top comic books. Witches. I think I want to say issue 1 came out in like October of like 2014.
Somewhere around there, 2014, 2015.
So my oldest is 11, so she was 2 when Witches first came out, and that book fucked me up. I was like a new time dad. Like it felt like it was, and I heard you talk about this a little bit in interviews, but it really felt like it was channeling like all the anxieties I felt I had about being a dad in that book. There were 2 books that really did it. Witches #1 and Walking Dead 100. Like really had a profound impact on me. And it was interesting reading Canary now and trying to think wow, they're like 10 years apart. The same guy that wrote, Witches wrote Canary, and I don't know. I was maybe trying to connect some dots that I can't connect yet, but I don't know.
Scott has some parenting skills, so he's definitely.
Unless we're like, I kind of write the way I go. Like it's weird because I feel like sometimes if you look at the books that I'm working on in a period, they're all sort of they're all kind of working a theme in some way. So death of the family on Batman was the same time as witches, and that's very much also about parenthood, weirdly, where Joker is saying to Batman, you don't really want a family, stopping you from being the best work version of yourself that you could be. And that was when we were pregnant with our second kid, that story was being sort of created. So you try and go for the jugular, your own jugular, and be like, what is the thing I'm most afraid of right now? And with Canary and this period, I wrote a couple books like this. There's another one, Book of Evil. It's like a very different book, but it's part of the same line. It's a future where like 92% of the population are born psychopaths, and no one knows why. And it takes place like 25 years after this, and it's with Jock, but it's mostly prose, which was its own challenge. But those two books and a couple other things explore this theme of like, I think the worry that what makes us special as a country, or some of the things that make us really special also can make us really scary at times, or the potential to become something really scary is there. And so that, and the world we're leaving our children, all of that kind of stuff is kind of in my mind, writing these, especially in 2020, when a lot of this stuff was going on. A lot of the between the pandemic and sort of political upheaval and everything was just like, so Canary for me is really about that. It's this group of people who really believe, this kind of cabal of wealthy robber barons who go around the world finding these spots that they believe there's this geological phenomenon where there's almost like an absence or a hole in the earth. But that hole is connected to this kind of strange cosmic chemistry that will mutate and evolve and change the things that touch it. And if water or anything goes through it, it will start to alter the biology of anything that comes into contact with it. And they think that this is holy. They think that this is almost like God fallen to earth, or to them, sort of the myth of Lucifer, someone that falls from heaven and breaks into pieces, and those pieces are void, and those voids fall all across the earth, like mouths, like hungry mouths, and those things land. And if you can find one and embrace it, sort of, and kiss that thing, go into it in that way, you'll emerge as something reborn. And so America holds one of these, and it kind of also appears and becomes active, and then disappears at times based on this strange kind of cosmic orbit. So it comes once every 100 and something years, it activates, or it becomes kind of energized. And so it's very much about like a thing that's a supernatural, horrible thing. It's like a scary hole in the ground that turns us into monsters. But what the book is about, because it's a Western too, is like we were saying earlier, is, this fear that these people that believe that we're special because we have the capacity to turn into something monstrous. And so that we're supposed to sort of rise up and become this horrible version of ourselves, as opposed to some of the things that Holt recognizes make us really special in a different way, and some of the things that we hold really dear in our principles that maybe make us the opposite of that. And so it's supposed to be this battle of good and evil that really is about different strains of what makes us who we are, in primal ways. I think as a country, things that I think are incredibly admirable, this weird democratic experiment where we're all in it together and we decide we're all equal. And then this other thing, which is, this total rampant, selfishness and the ability to step on other, and that's what these people see as like, see, we're special. Right. We should be this conquering, crazy thing. And so anyway, not to ramble, but that's
like rambling here. It's book, fine.
Yeah, that's what this book is thinking about in that way. It was really fun to get to blend those things in ways that felt like, hadn't tried or hadn't seen anywhere else yet.
Yeah. I think it works. I think it all works. And a lot of that also is to Dan's credit, because it's a fantastic looking book. And I mean, I love Dan's artwork. Was glad to see when he had this his art book on Zoop. I think last
Oh, yeah.
year was fantastic. So, um,
Oh,
yeah,
thanks.
I think it really works, and I hope folks check it out. So it's going to be out the whole trade June 26th. So when you're listening to this podcast, make sure you let your local comic shop know so you can get a copy of the trade, because it's I'm a big fan of westerns, like I said before, and love the horror genre, and I love to see the two of these mashed up in such a way.
Yeah, and
Uh,
Dark Horse does a great job of. I can't wait to see what it actually looks like from a design standpoint, and I'm sure it's going to be an amazing trade paperback.
Yeah, Dark Horse has just been doing. They put out fantastic stuff. I love so many of their books. Yeah, I think it's going to be great. So, I just wanted to ask, in terms of westerns, I'm always curious. Do you have a favorite western, both of you?
Oh man, I mean, I could name a ton, but Butch Cassidy and
Yeah.
the Sundance Kid is probably. I saw that with my dad on TV, and Paul Newman is like my favorite of all time on every level. But
Yeah.
that and the Searchers and the Unforgiven and the and Outlaw Josie Wells, and then there are modern ones too. Like I really loved Bone Tomahawk and Hell or High Water is sort of a modern western too.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I like Hell or
Yeah.
High Water.
yeah, I mean, yeah, those are my favorites. Are probably those that I don't know if there's anyone that you wouldn't know off of a list of
That's
the
true.
classics, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and all those. So
Yeah,
Yeah, I like.
how about you?
I would say Shane was like probably the first Western I fell in love
Oh yeah,
with Alan Ladd, and then probably Pale Rider I really like too. I mean, all those
Taylor
Clint
Wright was
Eastwood
awesome.
Westerns were great. Unforgiven, that was probably just almost a flawless Western. So, but there's so many good ones.
That's why I
There's
feel
good
like it's a
Westerns.
genre that we should do more of these days. You
Oh
know what I
yeah,
mean? I know it's hard to do because it's also historically, in a real way, it gets more. It's probably more uncomfortable and for all kinds of
oh
reasons.
yeah, so many
But that
reasons.
said, like it has this power too of like being so American. It's so
It's
the
crazy
mythology
that
of it.
yeah,
yeah, it's crazy to think about, like, as you get older and everything, and have a family and recognize generational experiences. And when you go back and think about when this Wild West period actually took place, it's not too many generations ago. Like, you know, the East Coast was fairly civilized, and it wasn't too long ago when the West really wasn't. And you can see that in some of the buildings. I live in California now. I used to live back east, but an old building out here is 200 years old. And in New York, that's nothing. It's crazy.
yeah,
Like, 100-year-old building here is like revered, and they put a plaque on it. It's crazy. And so just the lawlessness and the relatively short time of period that took place, it's not too far past our current history, and yet it seems almost like a mythology. So that's what kind of what makes, I think, the Western genre so unique and special, because it seems like, oh, that was could be the 1400s. It was really about 100 years ago, or a little over 100 years ago. It's not that long.
yeah,
It's your great grandfather could have been in the Wild West. It's crazy.
yeah, yeah. No, that's true. It's not as long ago as we think it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope everyone goes and picks it up. I absolutely loved it. I was glad I got to read it. I'll probably also pick up the trade just because I like to have those things in my hand, even though I got to read it digitally.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah, I mean, before we go, I just want to wrap everything up. If there's anything else you highlight or that you have coming out. I mean, Scott, I know you have your newsletter and your class is still going on.
Yeah.
And I think if anyone hasn't read Barnstormers, you should. But I know you have a couple other series that are coming out right now as well. And Dan, if there's anything that
White
you want to talk about.
Oh no, I was going to say your new one that's coming out, Scott, with Francis.
Yeah, with Francesco, who is like a familiar face, and Francesco and I really like to do classic horror. Like, he's a huge Universal monster fan, and so am I. And going all the way back to 1930s, 1920s, all the way to now, horror. We both love it. So what we try and do is like create something that feels like a classic horror story, and then sort of do a kind of modern take on it. So it has elements of both. So White Boat's very much in that vein, where it's kind of like the island of Dr. Moreau, or something like that, an H.G. Wells or a Jules Verne kind of story, but updated to be to be about like scary rich people on an island now. So it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. But I mean, I'd love to keep the focus for me on. I really hope that anyone listening to this will go pick up Canary, because again, I'm like, I'm proud of all the stuff that I've worked on, but Canary is up there with the things that like I really I would put up with the best stuff I've ever been a part of easily. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful to Dan and to Comixology and Dark Horse, but to Dan in particular for building this thing together, because I love it. So I hope people will go out there and think about it in June.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah. I'm gonna blush over here.
No, I'm gonna hit you up. I'm like, whenever you're free, and come the fall, like whenever you're free, I want to do a lot more together. I'd love to work together again.
Likewise.
And this time we'll get to like hang out more and party more. That's what I mean. Like, it wasn't even like that I didn't have time to really, the books again, like the work was never an issue about getting to really put everything into the books, but it was, I in my mind, I had more, I wish I'd had more time to genuinely just socialize with Dan, because we get along, and I love hanging out with you. So that's my big regret about it. It was more like, not getting more of a chance to actually enjoy working together in a social way while we were doing it.
Yeah, it was kind of also a little bit overlapping with the pandemic quite a bit. So maybe the second time around, it'll be a different story.
That's true. But it was a real highlight getting to come see you and in your place and all that. And
yeah, it was nice. It was kind of interesting. I forget, it was a party during a convention. So we had Frank Thierry over and a bunch of friends. It was kind of nice.
That was the low light.
Yeah, that was everything a whole different direction. But a lot of drinking, maybe too much at that point with Frank. But
it was like getting to meet your wonderful family and all of that. It was a real pleasure. So, and I think I had my kid too. I had my kid with me. Yeah, you played with it was really fun. Yeah, it was when I was with Emmett. That's right, in California. Mm-hmm. And I was with my 11-year-old, because it was we were taking a father-son trip out there and doing a quick convention. But I promised him I'd take him out there and take him to like a baseball, to Dodger Stadium and all that stuff. So
nice.
Yeah, he's a huge baseball fan, like beyond huge baseball fan. So
yeah, I think he was wearing some baseball stuff when he came over.
He's one of those kids that like, my two sons are like so different. 3 sons. I mean, I have the third one is 5, but like as of yesterday, actually. But he, the 17-year-old is like just super happy-go-lucky, worries about nothing, is like handsome and popular, and I totally don't relate to it at all. I'm like, I was always like a ball of nerves. And then my 11-year-old is just like that, where he's like, worries about everything and all of that. And then also, he's the kind of kid that like loves one thing for a period of time and consumes that thing on every level. And baseball, it used to be, when he was little, it was Star Wars and Pokemon and all that. And now baseball has been it for like happily for the last 3 or 4 years, where he stayed with it. But he knows he knows everything, like every stat. And so I followed him down that rabbit hole, and it's been like a real joy. We have like partial season tickets to the Yankees here, and I just bothered Frank. Actually, I was just trying to get Frank to go with me tomorrow, but he can't go.
No.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, that's he's But that was fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun coming out there and seeing you.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you two get to work together again, only because I'll enjoy reading it, and I hope you get more hanging out time.
Yeah, me too, Jimmy. Thank you, dude. You guys do such a great job with these. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to get to be a part of it.
No, I thank you both for being on this. I think I was telling Dan before you joined us that I just like doing this, and Byron O'Neill is the other host, and we don't host it together. We just like handle our own episodes. But Byron wanted to start a podcast, and I said, yeah, I'll talk to people. And it's been 2 years. I've done over 100 of my own episodes, and gotten to talk to a lot of fun creators. So it's been really great. And especially with folks I'm a fan of and I've read a bunch of their stuff, it's just, it's just a joy to kind of listen to the two of you talk about comics. So thank you.
I could talk to Dan. I could talk to Dan for at least like another. We could go for. I was like, wait, this is over already? I could easily do more, but I appreciate it. And I know it's late also. So we got to do it again. That's what we have to do. Just do it again.
The two of you, you're welcome to come back anytime. But thank you, Scott and Dan. Thank you very much. Listeners, June 26th, Canary, the trade paperback, Western horror. It's got a little bit of cosmic horror as well. You're going to love it. Absolutely love it. Make sure you get it. Also, shout out to my brother, Bobby. He's the Cryptid Creator Corner's #1 most dedicated fan. I shout him out every episode because Bobby listens to all my episodes. And he buys a lot of comics too. We go to Baltimore Comic-Con together every year. And I started this bit like a couple episodes. I don't know how many episodes ago, and I keep doing it. So shout out Bobby, and thank you, listeners. Please pick up Canary and let me know if you like it, because I want to talk about it now. And thanks, Scott and Dan. I'll see you next time.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everybody. It's great seeing you, Scott. Thanks, Jimmy, for all the kind words.
Dan. We got to catch up really soon.
All right.
This is Byron O'Neill, one of your hosts of the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by Comic Book Yeti. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It lets us know how we're doing, and more importantly, how we can improve. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner, maybe you would enjoy our sister podcast, Into the Comics Cave. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.